Have you ever felt invisible in a room full of people who know your name? That's how Absalom felt every single day. He was a prince, son of King David, heir to a throne that stretched across Israel. Yet he stood in the palace shadows, listening to his father's advisors laugh in the throne room, a room he believed should one day be his. But something burned inside him. A question that haunted his sleep and followed him through torchlit hallways. How long can a man stay silent before his silence destroys him? Absalom's eyes were unreadable. Beautiful, yes, everyone said he was the most handsome man in all Israel. But behind that charm lived something darker. Trauma. Rage. Ambition. He pressed his hand against the cold stone wall, feeling the pulse of the palace. Somewhere in these halls, his sister Tamar cried alone. Somewhere beyond these walls, his half-brother Amnon walked free. And somewhere deep in Absalom's chest, a storm was gathering. Footsteps echoed behind him. Someone had been watching. The memory came like a knife. Tamar ran to him that day, stumbling through the courtyard. Her royal robe was torn. Her face was wet with tears. Her hands shook as she reached for him. Absalom, she whispered, barely able to speak. Amnon, he. She couldn't finish. She didn't have to. Absalom felt his blood turn to ice, then to fire. He pulled her close, wrapping his cloak around her trembling shoulders. His jaw tightened until it ached. Stay with me, he said softly. I will take care of you. I promise. But inside, a beast was waking. He watched his sister's tears fall and felt something break in his soul, something that could never be fixed. This wasn't just pain. This was a wound that would define everything he would become. Tamar buried her face in his chest. And Absalom stared into the distance, his mind already calculating, already planning. A messenger appeared at the courtyard entrance. Prince Absalom, the king summons you. Absalom already knew what David would say. Nothing. David sat on his throne, but he looked small. His hands trembled. His eyes couldn't meet Absalom's. The great warrior king, the man who killed Goliath, who conquered armies, now sat in silence like a frightened child. Absalom stood before him, waiting. The advisors shifted uncomfortably. Everyone knew what had happened to Tamar. Everyone knew who did it. But David said nothing. Father, Absalom finally spoke, his voice steady but sharp. Will you do nothing? David's lips parted, but no words came. Absalom felt something cold settle in his heart. He wasn't looking at his father anymore. He was looking at a coward. A weak man who called himself king but couldn't protect his own daughter. If you won't act. Absalom said slowly, I will remember this. The words hung in the air like a curse. David flinched but still said nothing. Absalom turned and walked out of the throne room. His footsteps echoed through the empty hallway. And on his face was a new expression, dangerous, determined, and patient. The wound had become a scar. 2 years passed. Absalom smiled more than ever. He hosted feasts, told jokes, laughed loudly at his father's table. Everyone thought he had moved on. Everyone thought he had forgiven. But every night, Tamar cried softly in her room. And every night, Absalom heard her. He trained himself to be patient. To hide the fire burning in his chest. To wait for the perfect moment like a hunter waits for prey. He watched Amnon at banquets, drinking wine, acting as if nothing had happened. His half-brother never apologized. Never even looked at Tamar. Absalom's smile never faltered. But his servants noticed something. The prince had stopped sleeping well. He spent long hours staring at the stars, whispering to himself. One evening, Absalom called a trusted servant to his chamber. Prepare a feast, he said calmly. Invite all my brothers. Make it grand. Make it beautiful. The servant bowed. Yes, my lord. Absalom's eyes gleamed in the lamplight. And make sure Amnon comes. The feast was perfect. Music filled the air. Wine flowed freely. Amnon sat near Absalom, laughing, his guard completely down. He drank cup after cup, his face growing red and cheerful. Absalom watched him with a calm, terrifying smile. Then, as the night deepened and the music grew louder, Absalom leaned close to his servants. His voice was barely a whisper. When I give the signal, strike him. The servants' eyes widened, but they nodded. Absalom raised his cup. To my brother Amnon, he called out. Everyone cheered. Amnon grinned, lifting his own cup. Absalom's smile never wavered. Then he nodded. The servants moved fast. Swords flashed. Amnon's laughter turned to screams. Wine spilled like blood across the table. Guests scrambled in terror, knocking over chairs and plates. Chaos erupted. Absalom sat perfectly still, watching Amnon fall. His face showed no emotion. No regret. No joy. Just cold, terrifying calm. Through the screaming, a voice cried out. "The king will never forgive this." Absalom stood slowly and walked toward the door. Absalom fled into the wilderness. His horse galloped through dust and darkness as Jerusalem faded behind him. He rode for days, barely stopping, until he reached Geshur, his mother's homeland. There, he lived in exile. The nights were cold and silent. Sometimes he lay awake, staring at the stars, wondering if he had made a mistake. But he never said it out loud. Never admitted the regret that gnawed at him. Instead, he trained. He grew stronger. He became sharper. And strangely, even in exile, people whispered his name with admiration. "Have you heard about Absalom?" Travelers would say. "The prince who avenged his sister. They say he's the most handsome man in all Israel. They say he should be king." 3 years passed. Then one morning, a caravan appeared on the horizon. Dust rose as horses approached. Absalom stood and watched them come. A messenger dismounted and bowed. "Prince Absalom, there is news from Jerusalem." Job came in secret. He met Absalom in a small house on the edge of Geshur. The air was tense. Job was David's commander, loyal, ruthless, calculating. "Why are you here?" Absalom asked, his eyes sharp. Job studied him carefully. "Jerusalem misses you." Absalom laughed bitterly. "Does my father miss me?" Job didn't answer right away. "The king has not decided." Absalom saw through the politics immediately. David was torn, between justice and love, between law and fatherhood. And because David couldn't decide, the kingdom remained divided. Absalom leaned forward, his voice soft but dangerous. "Then help him decide." Job's eyes flickered. He knew what Absalom was asking. An alliance. A bargain. A way back into the palace. Job stood slowly. "I'll see what I can do." As he turned to leave, he hesitated at the door. That hesitation told Absalom everything. A dangerous alliance had just begun. Absalom returned to Jerusalem. Crowds lined the streets, cheering as he rode through the gates. People waved. Children ran beside his horse. It felt like a hero's welcome. But when Absalom reached the palace, the gates remained closed. David refused to see him. Absalom stood in the courtyard, staring up at the palace windows. He could feel eyes watching him from behind curtains. He could hear whispers. But no one opened the door. He was home. Yet he was still invisible. His fists clenched. His jaw tightened. 2 years. He had waited 2 years in exile. And now, even after returning, his father still turned away. Absalom stood there for a long time, the crowd slowly dispersing behind him. The sun set. The palace grew dark. Finally, he turned and walked away. But as he left, he whispered to himself, a vow that would change everything. "If he won't call me, I'll make him come." Absalom sent for Job. Once. Twice. 3 times. Job ignored every message. Absalom's patience snapped. He called his servants and pointed toward Job's barley field, right next to his own land. "Burn it," he said calmly. The servants hesitated. "My lord, that's Job's." "Burn it." Flames roared to life. Smoke filled the sky. People ran, shouting. Job's workers scrambled to save what they could, but the fire spread fast. Within an hour, Job stormed into Absalom's house, his face twisted with fury. "What have you done?" he shouted. Absalom didn't even look up. He sat calmly, polishing his sword. "You ignored me," he said simply. "Now you're here." Job's chest heaved. He glared at Absalom, but he knew he'd been outplayed. "What do you want?" Absalom finally looked up, his eyes cold. "Get me in front of the king. Or burn the rest yourself." Job stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned and left, headed straight for David's chamber. David finally called for him. Absalom walked into the throne room slowly, his heart pounding. This was the moment he had waited for. The reconciliation. The embrace. The words he needed to hear. David stood and walked toward him. Absalom bowed low. And then David kissed him. But it was cold. Stiff. A royal gesture without warmth. A father's duty without a father's heart. Absalom felt it immediately, the emptiness of the embrace. He looked into David's eyes and saw distance. Obligation. Not love. "You may go," David said quietly. Absalom bowed again and left. But as he walked through the palace halls, something broke inside him. He had returned. He had waited. He had humbled himself. And still, his father didn't see him. Absalom stopped in the courtyard and stared back at the throne room. His eyes lingered on the throne itself. And for the first time, a dangerous thought took root. If he won't give it to me, I'll take it. Absalom began appearing at the city gate every morning. He arrived early, dressed beautifully, his long hair flowing like a crown. He stood where people brought their disputes, their complaints, their problems. And he listened. If only someone cared, a man would say. Absalom would nod. If I were judge in this land, I would make sure justice was done. He embraced the people. He smiled. He remembered their names. The king is too busy, Absalom would whisper. But I am here. I see you. Word spread quickly. Have you met Absalom? He actually listens. He cares about us. He should be king. Absalom did this for 4 years. Day after day. Smiling, speaking, stealing hearts one conversation at a time. And slowly, the people's love shifted. From David, to Absalom. One day, a crowd gathered at the gate just to see him. They chanted his name. Absalom stood among them, letting the sound wash over him. Finally, he felt seen. Absalom sent messengers across Israel. Secretly. Quietly. To every tribe. Wait for the signal, he told them. When you hear the trumpet, proclaim, Absalom is king in Hebron. He traveled to Hebron under the pretense of fulfilling a vow. Hundreds followed him. They thought it was a religious gathering. But Absalom had other plans. When everyone was assembled, trumpets suddenly blasted across the hills. The sound echoed like thunder. Absalom is king. Absalom is king. The crowd erupted in cheers. People who had secretly wanted change now saw their moment. Absalom stood before them, calm and composed, as if this was always meant to be. A crown was placed on his head. Not in Jerusalem. Not by his father's hand. But in rebellion. Absalom's face remained eerily calm. Too calm. He looked toward the horizon, toward Jerusalem, and whispered to himself. It's mine now. A messenger mounted his horse and raced toward the capital. Toward David. David was in his chamber when the messenger arrived. The words hit him like a blade. My lord. Absalom has declared himself king in Hebron. The hearts of Israel are with him. David's face drained of color. He staggered backward, gripping the edge of the table. My own son, he whispered. His advisors urged him to fight. To rally the army. To crush the rebellion. But David shook his head. We flee. That night, the king of Israel left his palace. He walked through the streets barefoot, weeping, his head covered in shame. His loyal servants followed, silent and heartbroken. Jerusalem fell quiet. The torches dimmed. The palace stood empty. And in the distance, Absalom's army began its march toward the city. The storm had arrived. Absalom entered Jerusalem like a conqueror. The gates opened without resistance. The palace guard stepped aside. He walked through the same hallways where he once felt invisible, now echoing with the sound of his victory. He climbed the steps to the throne room. And there it was. The throne. Empty. Waiting. Absalom sat down slowly. The weight of it should have felt right. But something was wrong. The air felt heavy. Oppressive. As if the throne itself rejected him. He shifted uncomfortably. His advisors entered, bowing low. Among them was Ahithophel, David's most trusted counselor, now turned traitor. My king, Ahithophel said smoothly. The city is yours. But David still lives. We must act quickly. Absalom nodded, but his hands trembled slightly on the armrests. He had everything he wanted. So why did it feel like a curse? Ahithophel stepped closer, his voice cold and calculated. Give me 12,000 men. I will kill David tonight. Absalom's breath caught. This was it. The final move. The room fell silent. Ahithophel's plan was flawless. Fast. Brutal. Strike now while David is weak and fleeing, Ahithophel urged. Kill only the king. The people will return to you. Absalom's mind raced. This was what he wanted, wasn't it? To take the throne. To end his father's reign. But something held him back. An invisible weight pressed against his chest. Fear? Doubt? Guilt? Before he could answer, the doors opened. Hushai entered, an old man, loyal to David, but now pretending to serve Absalom. My king, Hushai said, bowing deeply. May I speak? Absalom gestured for him to continue. Hushai's voice was careful, trembling slightly. Ahithophel's plan is bold, but risky. David is a warrior. He won't be caught so easily. If you fail, the rebellion ends. He paused, letting the words sink in. You deserve to lead this victory yourself. Not Ahithophel. Gather all Israel. March as a king. Crush David with overwhelming force. Absalom listened, his pride swelling. Hushai smiled inwardly. The trap was set. Absalom made his choice. We wait, he declared. I will gather all Israel and lead the army myself. Ahithophel's face went pale. He knew immediately, this was a mistake. A fatal one. He stood slowly, his voice tight. My king, you're making an error. But Absalom waved him away. I have decided. Ahithophel bowed stiffly and left the throne room. No one noticed the darkness in his eyes. That night, Ahithophel returned to his home. He set his affairs in order. He wrote letters. He said goodbye to no one. And then he hanged himself. When the news reached Absalom the next morning, he froze. His hands shook. His advisors exchanged nervous glances. For the first time since sitting on the throne, doubt crept into Absalom's heart. Why would he? Absalom whispered. No one answered. But deep down, Absalom felt it, a chill, a whisper in his soul. This crown is cursed. The final battle was coming. Absalom gathered his forces, thousands of men, chariots, warriors loyal to his cause. He dressed in royal armor, his long hair tied back, his face set with determination. But something had changed. His confidence was cracking. His hands trembled when no one was looking. He couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. Ahithophel's death haunted him. And worse, reports kept coming that David's forces were regrouping. Joab was with him. Seasoned warriors. Men who had fought giants and conquered kingdoms. Absalom stood on a hill, staring toward the wilderness where his father waited. For the first time, he wondered, what if I lose? A scout burst into the camp, breathless. My lord. David's army is moving. They're ready. Absalom's heart pounded. He turned to his commanders. Prepare the troops. We march at dawn. But as he walked toward his tent, he felt it, a shadow following him, unseen but suffocating. The kingdom he tried to steal was slipping through his fingers. And heaven itself seemed to be watching. The battle began in the forest of Ephraim. Trees towered overhead, thick and twisted. The ground was uneven, treacherous. Absalom's army charged forward, confident in their numbers. But they were walking into a trap. David's men knew the terrain. They used the forest against Absalom's forces, splitting them, ambushing them, cutting them down. Chaos erupted. Absalom rode through the battle, shouting orders, trying to hold his army together. But everywhere he looked, his men were falling. Panic set in. He turned his mule and fled deeper into the forest, branches whipping past his face. He didn't see the low-hanging oak tree. His long hair, his pride, his crown, caught in the thick branches. The mule ran out from under him. And Absalom was left hanging in the air, suspended between heaven and earth. He struggled, gasping, his hands clawing at his hair. But the branches held him tight. A soldier saw him and ran to find Joab. Absalom hung there, helpless, humiliated. The prince who tried to steal a kingdom, now trapped by his own pride. Joab arrived with 3 javelins. He stared up at Absalom, hanging helplessly, still alive, still breathing. Please. Absalom whispered. Let me go. But Joab's face was stone. You brought this on yourself. He raised the first javelin and thrust it into Absalom's chest. Then the second. Then the third. Absalom gasped, blood spilling from his lips. His body went limp. Joab's armor-bearers surrounded him, striking until there was no doubt. Absalom, the beautiful prince, the charming rebel, the son who wanted to be king, was dead. Joab ordered his men to cut him down. They threw his body into a deep pit in the forest and covered it with stones. No royal burial. No tomb. No honor. Just a pile of rocks in the wilderness. The rebellion was over. Israel's army scattered. The battle ended. And a messenger was sent to tell King David. David sat waiting between the gates. A watchman called down, "A runner is coming." David stood. Is he alone? Yes, my lord. David's heart pounded. Then he brings news. The messenger arrived, breathless, and bowed low. Victory, my lord. Your enemies are defeated. David didn't smile. His voice trembled. Is the young man Absalom safe? The messenger hesitated. David's face went pale. Tell me. My lord. Absalom is dead. The words shattered him. David staggered backward, his legs giving out. He climbed the stairs to the room above the gate, his sobs echoing through the city. "Oh my son Absalom! My son Absalom! If only I had died instead of you! Oh Absalom, my son, my son!" His cries filled the air, raw, broken, unending. The victory felt like defeat. Israel had won the battle. But David had lost his son. The city of Jerusalem was silent. David's army returned, but there was no celebration. No triumph. The soldiers walked through the streets with their heads down, ashamed, as if they had lost. Because their king was mourning. David locked himself away, weeping, refusing to eat or speak. His grief consumed him. The man who had defeated Goliath, who had conquered nations, was now broken by the loss of a son who betrayed him. Job finally forced his way into David's chamber. "My lord," he said harshly, "you shame your men. They saved your life today. They fought for you. And you weep for the enemy." David looked up, his eyes red and hollow. Job's voice softened. "If you don't rise and thank your people, they will leave you. And you will be more alone than ever." David slowly stood. He wiped his face and walked to the gate, where his soldiers waited. They saw their king, and they wept with him. In the forest of Ephraim, Absalom's body lay beneath the stones. No one spoke his name with admiration anymore. No songs were sung. No monuments were raised. He had built a pillar for himself during his life, hoping to be remembered. But now, that pillar stood empty, a reminder of pride, ambition, and a kingdom that was never his to take. Absalom had everything. Beauty, charm, strength, the love of the people. But he threw it all away chasing a crown that didn't belong to him. He thought he could force destiny. He thought he could rewrite the story. But some things cannot be stolen. The kingdom he wanted so badly had slipped through his fingers like sand. And now, all that remained was silence. Absalom's story is a warning. He wasn't born a villain. He was a son who felt unseen. A brother who wanted justice. A man who carried wounds that never healed. But instead of seeking healing, he let his wounds control him. Instead of forgiving, he plotted revenge. Instead of waiting for God's timing, he forced his own. And in the end, he lost everything. The Bible says, "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." Absalom's pride, his beauty, his charm, his ambition, became the very thing that destroyed him. He thought he could steal a kingdom. But kingdoms aren't built on rebellion. They are built on faithfulness. So what do we learn from Absalom? First, unhealed wounds will destroy you if you don't deal with them. Absalom carried the pain of Tamar's assault, his father's silence, and his own invisibility. Instead of healing, he let it turn into bitterness, then revenge, then rebellion. Second, don't force what isn't yours. Absalom wanted the throne before it was time. He couldn't wait. He couldn't trust. And it cost him everything. Third, pride blinds us. Absalom's beauty and charm made him confident, too confident. He believed his own hype. And when Hushai flattered him, he fell for it. Fourth, some battles aren't against people, they're against the wounds inside us. Absalom thought his enemy was David. But his real enemy was the brokenness in his own heart. And finally, God's timing is perfect. If Absalom had waited, trusted, and healed, perhaps the throne would have been his one day. But he couldn't wait. And so, he fell. Absalom's grave remains unmarked. But his story echoes through the ages. A prince who tried to steal a kingdom. A son who never felt seen. A man who let his wounds become his destiny. Perhaps you, too, have felt invisible. Perhaps you've carried wounds that no one sees. Perhaps you've been tempted to force your way into a destiny that isn't yours yet. But remember Absalom. Remember that healing is better than revenge. That patience is better than rebellion. That God's timing is better than our ambition. Don't let your wounds control you. Don't force what isn't yours. And don't let pride blind you to the truth. Because the kingdom you're trying to steal might be the very thing that destroys you. But if you wait, if you heal, if you trust, God will give you everything you need. Not through rebellion, but through redemption. And that, my friend, is a story worth living.